welcome to this Keynote panel. So I'm Richard Hall, I'm from PwC, and I'm honoured to be joined by Paul Chichester and James Line on this panel. I'll let them introduce themselves when they speak, rather than me attempt to do justice to them. So we're really excited to be able to have a conversation today around essentially kind of a bit of a state of the nation on cybersecurity. Where are the threats, where are the vulnerabilities, where are things going? And what we're going to do is Paul's going to talk for a bit, James will talk for a bit, and then we'll have a bit of discussion and then try and open up most of the time for questions and discussion from the floor. So we'll have the Slido and we'll have opportunity for people to ask questions from mics as well. And I think I would just say, from my perspective, a lot of the work we've been doing, the number of breaches we've been assisting with, responses to, and the scale of those breaches, the impact on the organisations they've touched, and the sort of the breadth of them. It feels to me as if the last 18 months things really have changed, and sort of things have gone up a gear, both from nation-state perspective and criminals. And so I think it'd be really interesting to hear Paul and James's view and have a bit of discussion on where things have gone in the last 18 months and where they're likely to go, or where we think they might go. And hopefully it'll be useful and educational. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Paul to take the stage. Mr. Chips.
Thanks. What's it, useful and educational? Okay, I'll do my best. Good morning. So my name is Paul Chichester. I am the Director of Operations at the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. Picking up on some of the points Richard made there, what I'm hopefully going to sort of do in the time I've got is give you a sense of what has and hasn't changed over quite a long period. There's a bit of sort of history in this from an NCSC perspective, but really to sort of stimulate debate and conversation later, hopefully. I'm never quite sure when there's a point where in a new organisation you stop telling people about your new organisation. So a lot of people hopefully know who we are. If you don't, National Cybersecurity Centre is part of GCHQ. It was conceived as an idea in 2015. We launched in October 2016. We have our headquarters in London, Victoria, in a building that I think won the Carbuncle Award this year for sort of the ugliest building, which is really unfair. People sort of been to Nova. I don't think it's that bad actually. I quite like it. The kind of key aim with the NCSC was to kind of bring together the alphabet soup, if you like, of government cybersecurity. And we've kind of got sort of four main sort of missions, if you like. The first is to actually help people, give people advice, guidance. We are there now for everybody in the UK. So the precursor organisations people would have known about would help government maybe, would help with critical infrastructure. Hopefully sort of people have seen some of the work we've done in the last 20 months. And that's about helping everybody from, as I say, government down to the citizen, and all points in between. So to some degree, a sort of cartoon of our mission is to basically defend everybody from everything in cyberspace. It's quite a sort of busy task. One of the key reasons we were created was to be that single place that sort of dealt with a crisis, if you like, in terms of cybersecurity. The UK hasn't had that sort of criticality one event yet. Kieran Martin, our chief exec, has said that's kind of a matter of time, and it's obviously sort of probably true. So for us, this is about making sure that there is one place in government that can coordinate a cyber incident. In the first 20 months that we've been created, we've dealt with over 800 varying sort of significant cyber incidents. Some will have got into the press, some quite a lot don't, but it's a daily sort of treadmill of kind of dealing with incidents. And one of the sort of, to some degree, sort of downsides of my job is looking after that and being responsible for something we call victim notification, which is a nice way of saying knocking on somebody's door and telling them they've had a breach, which for some reason we're never really welcomed with open arms. But it's one of the things that we do. We see a lot of events through the course of our business, and we report those to the organisations affected, and then try and help them beyond that. Another key part, and to some degree sort of touch on why our history around this, is understanding the threats and vulnerabilities, but you can't manage risk without really having that kind of deep insight into those two things. So we work hard on that. And the final sort of part of our mission, which hopefully a lot of people have seen, is kind of what we call our nurture or develop responsibility, which is trying to make the UK have greater capability and capacity in cybersecurity. One of, I think, the best parts of my job is supporting things like the Cyber First work we do, the girls' competition that we've run for 2 years running now, and working generally with the community to kind of grow that talent pipeline. There are nowhere near enough people in this business, and we've got to start as young as we possibly can. Okay, so really what I'm going to sort of cover is sort of a quick run through of 20 years of how the NCSC and its precursor elements have perceived the threat. You will know all of these stories. This is kind of a view from what we saw, and really kind of, sort of stimulate some of those kind of questions hopefully later. So, unfortunately, some of you have heard me talk before, will have probably heard me say this before, but I joined GCHQ just shy of 30 years ago. And even then we had a cybersecurity mission. I don't know if we called it that at the time, we called it InfoSec. And the job I was given was to build a provably secure computer system. How hard can that be? You'll note there isn't one really, and so I wasn't overly successful. But I was given these two books when I joined. And there's a point to this as we kind of go through. So hopefully everybody's read the one on the left. I'd love to think everybody's read the one on the right, but given it's probably been out of print for about 15 years, probably not do. I think you can get a PDF version on the internet somewhere. As I say, Cliff's book is all about sort of how an adversary exploits basic vulnerabilities in systems. And a lot of the things that he discovered that he saw the actors exploiting, I would assert, and from the victim notifications we do, we still see every day. Building a secure computer system. We did know, and we still know how to build a secure computer system. Perhaps rather sort of controversially, I would assert we choose not to. Now we choose not to for lots of valid reasons. But there are still many of the lessons in that book that is 30 years old that we're still not learning today. So something about why is that? So how did it kind of look from GCHQ's perspective? We've talked recently about sort of our work on the Russian threat. That's kind of a big sort of element of our work at the moment, as you would imagine. Moonlight Maze is something that's come into the public domain sort of more recently. Sort of community of folks, including some of a great team, did a really good piece on that. That was probably one of the first nation-state investigations that we worked on. And I was very sort of fortunate to be involved in that. And that kind of, to some degree, is the anchor in a lot of the work we do. It wasn't the only thing we were investigating at the time, 20 years ago. But it certainly is something that still has echoes today. And we'll sort of touch on that towards the end. So this is not a new thing. I mean, we're sort of sitting in... Somebody told me yesterday that there's like 42 cybersecurity events in London this week. Most of my career in this business has involved none. Sort of cybersecurity is an interesting topic, is quite a relevant sort of relatively new thing. But the topic isn't new, and the work that we've been doing isn't necessarily that new. I kind of call the 2000s APT-tastic. Kind of an interesting sort of time. I think kind of, most people will probably, that's the time when most people started to kind of realise around the threat. From our now NCSC point of view, the threats that we were tracking then we're still tracking now. Again, a lot of these things have quite a longevity to them. And for us, understanding the adversary is a really, really important part of our work. We are responsible for doing attribution formally for UK government. So it's the NCSC's job to advise government and ministers about who we think is responsible for certain actions. We've started to do more of that in the public domain recently. You will have seen some of that, those announcements being made by government. That's backed up by the work that we do in the NCSC and the analysis behind that. So this is sort of one, going back, I think it was about 2005, there was an article about the Parliament, sort of being attacked. It was stopped at the time, but you're starting to kind of get into the media. Net Traveller, again, sort of, I think the key point with this one was really, it was a picture that sort of spoke to the global nature of some of these attacks. And that was a Google hack, which again, sort of Aurora, people will hopefully remember that. That was really starting where it kind of got into people's consciousness. We have sort of, sort of monitored and observed those threats kind of through all of that time. And to some degree sort of seen the change, but sometimes the re-innovation. So increasingly, I'm sort of interested in James's point of view on this, but increasingly we see actors using capability they haven't used for years, because it now, to some degree, it's aged off in terms of it being known about. And so all of a sudden it's new again, yet it's 5 or 6 years old. So the date isn't entirely accurate. Stuxnet, for those that will sort of remember detail, it was about June 2009. But there was a point in time where it kind of the threat went from being about stealing data to causing harm. And again, we kind of think of cyber warfare, which is a phrase I hate, by the way, so sort of apologies for using it here. But there's something around kind of the change in that kind of MO. And again, it's not new. People sort of talk about that these days as sort of cyber attacks and things like that. The adversary's been sort of doing that, to some degree for quite a long time. Stuxnet, the Sony hack, that again was attributed to North Korea, sort of Ukraine power outages in the last sort of year or two. But that, we've talked about the threat becoming disruptive, destructive, and coercive. And that's a real change. Having monitored that threat through 20 years, I think certainly in the last sort of few years, it has really become a place where nation states see this as a domain of operation. NATO declared cyberspace a domain of operation at the summit for last at Newport, the NATO summit, and it really is kind of getting into that space now. So 2017 is our kind of anchor in time and sort of how we saw things last year. I'm sure, I think isn't there a rule you can't do a presentation without a WannaCry sort of slide, so that's my kind of, is that true? I think probably. So again, sort of WannaCry was obviously sort of key moment in the NCSE's history, and sort of certainly the first 20 months as being created. It was a huge test for us. I would like to think that it showed why we needed an NCSC. I think the UK as a whole responded better because we had a single point to coordinate that in the UK. It was the first time that there was a ministerial COBRA, so crisis management meeting, chaired by the Home Secretary at the time. And it really, I think, sort of, again, in terms of sort of the dawn of a new sort of age in this space, really got into, I think, people's consciousness about how it could really affect us as citizens. About, so facts you learn when you're sort of responding to one of these things. So 1 million people turn up to the NHS at some sort of point every Monday. 1 million people turn up every Monday morning. So when you're dealing with this on the weekend, you're very conscious that what you're trying to do is make sure that 1 million UK citizens can get access to the NHS when they turn up the next day. That does focus the mind, I think it's fair to say. It was a brilliant sort of team effort across government, particularly the NHS, in the way they responded. But I think it was great to sort of see just how that coordination really paid off. And then sort of how many sort of international colleagues are in the room, but one of the things that we constantly get asked about now is, so the model that we have in the UK, can you export it? Should other people sort of be doing this? What's the value of organising cybersecurity in the way the UK has? And I think there's a lot of lessons that we've learned from events like this. So Parliament hack, another Parliament hack, again, sort of back to, 12 years from the first one I talked about. We responded to that. We worked very closely, again, the Parliament team. If there's anybody around here today from there, they did an amazing job. Just worked, constantly through that time to get the Parliament systems back up. But again, that sort of responding to that has been a kind of key element of the work we do. This was, again, something we sort of did to some degree under the radar. It got a little bit of publicity, but we actually, in the lead up to the general election, we supported all the political parties, parliamentary political parties, so those that have got seats in Westminster, to make sure that they had secure systems. We looked at the electoral systems themselves, and we had intelligence that told us there were sort of threats to some of those organisations and people. And it's one of those points where you've got that information, how do you use it? And it turns out you can't tell 3,500 people a secret, because it's not a secret once you tell 3,500 people. So how do you use comms and how do you use media to sort of get your message over? And we used, so we sort of did something very public to get that message over. NotPetya we've talked about, and I think sort of touch on that in a minute, but NotPetya was a kind of major event last year. That was interesting from our point of view, and again, it touched the UK slightly, but I think that's an event where we don't just look at incidents in the UK, we're looking at global cyber incidents every day to see what the potential impact on the UK is. I don't think I've got a picture on it, but so the Triton attacks that people will have seen against the control systems in the Middle East, that has a huge relevance to the UK. It hasn't impacted the UK, but we need to understand what the capability of that attack is, potentially who's behind it, and what the real threat to the UK is. So we can hopefully advise potentially targeted organisations. So 2018 so far, we again sort of in the sort of different sort of culture that we now have in the organisation, we're trying to share as much as we know publicly. This was a TLP white paper we published on the internet. Turla, some will know, is linked to Moonlight Maze, which was where I kind of started some of this conversation. And it's a threat that, again, we've been sort of tracking for 20 years and we're still publishing on it. And we published that not so long ago. Interestingly, I didn't get a lot of pickup. This was an Australian sort of article. We obviously noticed the adversary changed their MO, changed their malware pretty much within 2 weeks. So we issued another version of this. And I think for me, this is a daily battle, dare I say it. This isn't, no longer can you can't build a perfectly secure computer system. Our systems are imperfect. We have to deal with that and manage those incidents on a daily basis and respond to the adversary. And that was our kind of attribution on NotPetya. And again, it's part of a UK strategy to respond to some of the cyber threats that we're faced with. So I'll kind of end my session just kind of where I started. So in 1988, 1989, we knew a lot of the threats. There were novels that were being published about them, and we knew how to build a secure computer system. So why is it that we're sort of in a world where now we have global events? It's a global topic. We've got 42 events in London this week alone on cybersecurity. We clearly haven't fixed it. I doubt we ever will. So how do we respond to that? And I think how do we sort of change that sort of dynamic at the moment? What do we have to do differently going forward to try and sort of put things in our favour? Okay, I will stop now and I will hand over to James, I think.
James, over to you.
I love that it's 42 cybersecurity conferences. It's so wonderfully perfect, isn't it? Well, hello everyone, and very much on the theme of things that we've known about for a long time and that continue to do lots of damage. I want to do a bit of a whirlwind tour of some of the things that cybercriminals are doing right now that are still proving highly effective, and some of the ways they're varying these campaigns that I think is a bit of a telltale sign of what's to come. Over the last couple of years, I think we're all aware we've seen a mass focus on use of document-based malware, of phishing. We went through that period where exploiting web browsers and distribution via web was really the market leader, but with a reversion back towards these tactics as the likes of browser mitigations become much more robust. Here we have one of a standing huge number of campaigns at the moment, which essentially plays to the natural curiosity of every individual. We have a list of partners and associates in some kind of firm with the potential to learn about their salary and bonus. You might at first be tempted to think this is a vertical specific campaign. However, it seems to have applicability to pretty much any person with a copy of Excel who kind of furtively look around before clicking to find out how much unnamed partner X is actually earning. On the same theme, we have campaigns like this, a document that is clearly massively enhanced in its social engineering capabilities by a giant dollar. I have no idea why it's there. I think it's dumb, and it proves to be just as effective in the UK as in the US. So obviously there's some confusion about Brexit. Very bizarre. And it also has this little password feature, and it's quite neat because they provide the password, and the password is used as a part of the decryption routine for the payload, so kind of using security to make it easier to deploy malware. There's some really novel stuff going on in this area, some cool examples of borrowing authority, pretending to be the police, all the things that we've seen over the last few years, but evolving the languages and kind of deployment models. There's some really weird stuff too. This is strange. This is a piece of malware, and I don't know if it's a leaked security awareness tool or whether someone is just really angry with the world. What this does is it impacts you, it locks your computer for a number of seconds, and then scolds you about opening shit you shouldn't. And then it uninstalls itself. Completely. And you're like, no, there has to be more to this. So like, opening eye to like, So, there's weird stuff like this kind of doing the rounds as well. There's really interesting campaigns that are using our language, our kind of security concepts. We're on this new stage of heightened awareness, as Paul mentioned, where security is actually interesting and a cool topic with 42 cybersecurity conferences. Throwing around, tokens and two-factor authentication is an effective tool for the cyber criminals to build their credibility in social engineering campaigns as well. Lots and lots of examples of this. That leads to more and more interesting examples of malware design as well. This particular document deploys this sure ransom sample. I love it because it has a giant smiley, which is obviously what you need when all of your data has been encrypted. I also like the "I don't want my data" button, which I find kind of bizarre. Snares that, again, would seem to be quite niche, having broad appeal. Here's an invitation to a nuclear deterrence summit. Sounds like a riveting weekend. I'm sure lots of us would like to attend. Deploying malicious code once more with blends of languages. Lots of VBA, lots of macros, with stages into PowerShell and the like. And on that topic, of course, I think there was a universal groan of agony through the past few months when Microsoft decided they would put JavaScript into Excel. Right? Did you see this? Did you also just kind of see that news and go, oh. Yes, I mean, what a great idea. And of course, it took all of about 3 minutes. This wonderful proof of concept by Charles Darman, where he managed to get Bitcoin mining, or CoinHive, working inside an Excel document using JavaScript. The only reason I'm not demoing it, by the way, today is because there isn't time, it's speedy, and you need an internet connection, and it takes up a lot of data on my iPhone, which is a little upsetting. But it's actually pretty easy to get working. Now, at the moment, you've got to do some backflips, because it's in the insider preview version. But of course, this is coming to mainstream Excel. which gives another wonderful tool of interesting 7-bit ASCII-based languages in which to do obscure deployments of malicious code. So one concept evolving out of this I want to touch on briefly before we get towards the panel is some changes in ransomware. Now I feel really boring standing here talking about ransomware. I mean, we must all just be sick of the topic by now. But there's some quite interesting commercial and business model stuff happening. I think we're all kind of comfortable with the effectiveness of ransomware by now and the fact that it is going to continue to be a part of the ongoing threat. I mean, its brilliance is its just ubiquitous applicability to all of us. Stealing credit cards, annoying, targeting specific data, having to do fraud. So they went off after usernames and passwords and monetized more diverse data sources. And with ransomware, struck on the gold of a model where they don't need to care about what data you have, just that you care about your data, and would have a hard time clicking on a I don't want my data button. The evolution, of course, past that is using your power bill and your CPU to make money, getting into the realms of stealing resources to do cryptocurrency generation that is even more ubiquitous, arguably, can sit there for extended periods of time using the resources that we all have at our disposal. Since January, there's a series of campaigns that are worth paying attention to. They're ransomware as a service campaigns, not a new concept. Over the last couple of years, ransomware as a service offerings where you buy a product to make malware or you access a portal to generate ransomware have been pretty rife. GandCrab, Saturn, DataKeeper, these are kind of some of the new players in the party. And if you've not come across them, they're worth looking into. There's some commonality between them, although their quality of implementation varies. This is GandCrab version 1 here that's decryptable. Version 2 and a version 3 followed. Using deployment models like social engineering, pretending you've got a missing font that prevents you from accessing a web page. Well, that was kind of clever. Through to traditional web-based exploitation and deployment via document-based malware. But what they all have in common is features like this. A web-based interface where you can set some options, customize the ransom price, the address and so on, and click build and download, and just get delivered a nice, constructed, up-to-date piece of malware where some authors have put some effort into making sure that the security community isn't going to detect it. And I love this. They've even started giving security advice. We recommend to download the file without the .exe extension so you don't accidentally run it. I wish they hadn't put that, because that would make me so happy. The meta idea of a cybercriminal having to pay to decrypt their own ransomware is just delicious. But it does tell you a lot about their expected target market of this tool. Here's another great way. This is DataKeeper. Look at some of the functions. It's free for download and use. So we have freemium ransomware, ladies and gentlemen. Who wants to pay for a service in 2018? You log in, you kind of generate your malicious code, you set all these options I'm going to show you in just a second, and you distribute it. But the difference is, unlike these products and services of before, where you owned the ransomware, it's now a kind of advertising referral scheme. So you generate your malware, you distribute it, and this other criminal gang receives the money and pays you 40% of the profits. So there's no upfront investment in generating the malware. There's no kind of difficulties in dealing with all the digital currency and potentially getting caught as you have to kind of launder it. You just get paid a referral scheme. So you don't even actually own the people you hack anymore. That's how commoditized we are. People are taking options on referral cuts on compromising our computers. Isn't that bizarre? This is a quick snap of the generator program. You can see you can customize the extensions, you can deliver additional options or customize the front end of it. You can encrypt shares on subnet, whether or not you want to do a UAC bypass, run as admin, try self-running on remote machines using PS remoting and WMIC. And they've even got a lovely little build library. Presumably this is a direct reaction to the news that Microsoft was buying GitHub, and they've decided that no longer be an appropriate platform. That was very niche comedy, I'm sorry, but I heard a sympathy laugh from someone. I think it might have been Paul, but thank you, Paul. All right, so these are some of the things that are going on here. I want to do one last quick little thing as a reminder to stuff that we should be thinking about. And I just want to double back to Equifax. Equifax, of course, a big consequential breach not that long ago. And I want to point out, just in this short little demo, a couple of interesting things here. So I went and built a website using Apache struts and Java. It was probably the third most painful thing I've done in my entire life, because Java. And set it up so I could do this demonstration, which is wonderfully simple. You type exploit, and you get access to the web server, and you can access everything, browse around. You basically have a complete backdoor that owns everything. What's fascinating about this scenario is three things I want to draw us back to. The first one is, this attack actually occurred in consequence at a point where this particular flaw had been patched for over 4 months. And I don't think they're an unusual story in that operational failure. That should focus the minds for all of us. Secondly, it's an attack which leaves overt, obvious, oh God, look at this entries in your log files. And no one noticed until much later. Something we should focus our minds on. But most stunningly, since this particular event was reported and the details came to light, a little over 10,000 people have downloaded the production build of Apache struts that is still vulnerable. Granted, one of them is me. I don't think it's 10,000 other security researchers. So despite all of this high-profile event, there's still an alarming number of people, probably for backwards compatibility, installing exactly the same shitty software. So much as we'll get into some fun, shiny new stuff and talk about kind of bright new interesting areas of the industry, let's make sure that we do focus our minds around some of these lessons that en masse we're failing to learn. And with that, I shall sit down and we'll get to the panel.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, James. So James, a quick question. You mentioned ransomware. Do we know how much they're actually making out of this stuff?
A lot? No, is the
Well,
answer.
maybe fullness.
So we see the tip of the iceberg, and the numbers are significant, but the truth is we don't get a good ebb and flow of its entirety. Some of these payment channels are much less anonymous and opaque, much more transparent than people think. So we see enough to know that it's doing serious economic damage, but the true size of the iceberg underneath, no. But I don't think it matters for two reasons. One, the tip of the iceberg is big enough, we should damn well care anyway. Secondarily, it's not all about the money. There are lots of cases now of ransomware romping around the internet where the payment channels are broken. You cannot pay to get your data back, and there's a destructive piece that can impact potentially as much as life and limb. You talk about the scenario in the NHS. So I think that there's enough motive to say that it's bad enough we should care, even accepting what we don't know.
Yeah. That's good.
I think, from our point of view, it comes back to reporting. People aren't reporting a lot of these things, so I think we're really keen to encourage people to report events like this. The number of times I'll go to speaking events and people will come up to me afterwards and say, small businesses or individuals, I was compromised. they've not told anybody before they told me. I think there's something about that embarrassment factor. So it's really hard to quantify what some of those sort of figures really are.
Yeah, that's good. And Paul, you talked about NotPetya,
Yep.
which is game-changing in many ways.
Mm.
One of them, you
Yeah.
attributed it to Russia, which
Yeah.
is great. But some of the features of it were really different, and they sort of the way it spread, the speed it spread. So,
Yeah.
to anyone who doesn't know, it came in through offices in the Ukraine, and it spread across any global network that was connected to it. And the organisations we helped, I think it was all over in 60 minutes. So every single Windows machine that was turned on anywhere on that global network was inoperable within 60 minutes and had to be rebuilt, had software reinstalled. And the interesting thing for me is, when it's that quick, what's the future for security monitoring? Because there was stuff appearing in log files, but by the time the analyst has opened a log file alert, it's all over.
I mean, I think from our point of view, it can't just be observing these things. You've got to be sort of doing everything you can to constrain and contain that kind of event. I think that and WannaCry to some degree. I think this year or the last 12 months has been very much about almost unintended consequences, potentially. Sort of looking at how WannaCry spread, how NotPetya spread. To some degree, even the people writing these things probably don't realise or didn't when they were writing them and planning them, the likelihood of them spreading. And that's quite a worrying feature, that even without trying, people are having sort of global impact. And then what it does is highlight those vulnerabilities for other people to use consciously.
Yeah.
And it does feel like we've had a few of those, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You look at it and go, I think we were testing and didn't mean to go quite as far as you did. And then someone comes along and uses the same thing perfectly. I think there's in the action velocity piece, I think there's for me a couple of takeaways. The first is when you look at many of those distributions, they took advantage of trust models where once you were in, you were in.
Yeah.
And it was not necessarily, in all cases, really clever exploits. I know some of those have happened, that's a different problem. It was PS remoting and triggering remote tasks and reusing credentials, which we can learn from in terms of segregation and building businesses that are less flat. I also think it's part of the case in point for the industry's drive towards kind of machine learning, not just in the reflective log analysis sense, but in spotting at high velocity across large volumes of data, huge businesses, huge networks, things like that that are really atypical and unusual. Yeah. I think that's why we have to go there beyond the analyst responding to the line item entry.
Which I think is really interesting, because with NotPetya, it was really doing what a pen tester would do, a red team pen tester would do. It was just copying itself using PowerShell. And
use some of our tools.
Yeah, that's right. But the interesting thing was, everyone's mindset was, as an attacker was using this technique, we'd be able to catch their command and control traffic essentially, and we'd be able to see them do it. Yeah. And then it just took that one step of eliminating that and automating it. And so I guess that leads to the next question of, what should we be thinking of next? What's the next thing you think might happen that catches us off guard?
So I'd probably be far more wealthy than I am if I knew that exactly, I think. So almost kind of not answering the question, but to some degree we're still, the thing that worries me the most is actually something I've talked about and James sort of echoed, I think, around, we're still not doing the basics.
Yeah.
So, we keep wanting to focus on the next shiny thing or the next amazing attack vector. You don't need to be that good a lot of the time to have global impact. And so I think, getting people to focus on the basics and the things that they should be doing is far more important at the moment. There will always be that kind of, innovation by the adversary, either planned or unplanned, and we'll kind of respond to that. If you sort of saw how information was used as almost a weapon, in the last couple of years with hack and leak operations and things like that, the adversaries are certainly sort of still innovating, I think. But from an NCSE point of view, we're still really, really keen that people do the basics, do the sort of cyber hygiene. That will have a huge impact and improvement generally across the UK and globally.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the perennial say it every year message. And that sounds like I'm being really depressed, because I think we are doing a much better job than we historically have. We just need to do a much better job still as a community. If I was choosing something new, and it's not super shiny, but if I was choosing something new, I'd go in the direction of like the VPN filter stuff that happened, targeting devices outside the traditional focus domain of cybercrime, going beyond the Windows PC. No, that doesn't mean you're immune Mac users. I'm just playing the numbers game. But moving outside of those devices to embedded devices, to routers, to IoT more broadly, and actually, on the one end of the spectrum, you've got kind of consumer devices and routers. On the other end, it fits into the same point. Paul mentioned it. Triton, a piece of malware that explicitly focused on not just going after a HMI or a controller in industrial control space. It went after the SIS, the safety system. It went after the one component that is the last line of defense from preventing catastrophic life and limb impact in the event of compromise. There isn't much reason to go through the level of backflips and engineering required to compromise such a system without the intent of preventing it from kicking in and preventing catastrophic damage. So I think we've got everything from mainstream cybercrime in devices where we have a blind spot of less traditional security controls, reporting, logging, vendors less able to or less familiar with responding, all the way through to serious bits of infrastructure where they're used to not being paid quite so much attention to and relying on isolation and being segmented from the world. I think that whole area for me is the big scary next piece, and it feels like pace is building there, still low in numbers compared to mainstream cybercrime, but that bit scares me.
Yeah, and do you think it would even go as far as compromising security tools, because they often have the highest level of access and ability?
More and more exploits against security tools appear, and the Hippocratic Oath there is probably applicable. I also think there's just a broadening of targets theme. I mean, let's go back to the industrial control one. The stereotype target was the HMI or the controller. Now we're off in the safety system. What about sensors? What about these devices that are the sources of truth in these manufacturing processes? They're ostensibly becoming computers with operating systems, often running variants of security controls that are 15 years behind mainstream computing. What happens when they start being targeted? Your source of truth lies to you. So I think there's a target breadth thing that's not new but accelerating, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn to questions that are coming through on Slido, either from the floor or from a warehouse somewhere in Russia. And I'll just sort of read out the top ones, and as well in a few minutes we'll just sort of invite people from the floor to ask any questions you want to as well. So the first one from Anonymous: what's the two most painful things you've done in your life? I think that's because you said Java was the third. Yeah, that's right.
So the third was using Java for this exploit. The second was installing Java because I needed it. The first one was downloading Java because I needed to install it. But on a more serious basis, I think for me, some of the early day big global breaches, like I remember kind of 2004, 2005, and so big, and some of these campaigns that just hit the world on such an unbelievable scale. I remember kind of sleeping under my desk, eating inhumane amounts of pizza and coffee, and just talking to endless reams of people who'd had their lives impacted in pretty horrible ways by malware. That was probably the most painful period, but also one of the pieces I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to use Java, so I did not repress it.
Paul?
No, I think
You're welcome.
Let's not go there.
Java as well.
What's the likelihood that Spectre Meltdown will go the same route as WannaCry, which active malware on a global scale? I'm not saying it's coming from Edward Snowden, so my comment from Russian warehouse. Probably not wrong.
I don't think so.
If you just look at the way, so what we're talking about there, I think, though, aren't we, is the kind of exploit behind WannaCry, not WannaCry itself. And if you kind of look at the specifics around those two vulnerabilities or classes of vulnerabilities. I don't think, I can imagine now, sort of tomorrow we'll be responding to an incident and I'll be quoted back at myself, but I don't think so, is my honest answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, look at Eternal Blue in WannaCry. You've got something that's highly scalable, that does some kind of next level heap feng shui, that has a mass applicability of targets and high stability. I mean, frankly, a masterpiece of exploitation. Spectrum and WannaCry are also masterpieces and fantastic and interesting, but their attack model is much more kind of localized. It doesn't give you that same, I'm going to run stuff on that. But that's not to downplay their significance. Whilst I don't think that's true, I think they are a brilliant reminder that a modern computer is a stacking of so much legacy, of so many layers, of different concepts, of design decisions made 18 or 19 years ago that most of us treat as a black box. I mean, most people hadn't even heard of speculative execution before this came along. Maybe it's not those, but there be dragons in all those different layers of complexity, and maybe in there are some things of that nature that could have that degree of impact.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, things like that, because it's more about stealing data than causing a disruptive impact, but if you could use it to search for crypto keys, for example, then things like cryptocurrencies.
Local privilege escalation stuff.
It's a kind of stark reminder on normal currency. We have chips in our credit cards for a reason, a separate hardware, and then you're using cryptocurrencies and you're running it all on your main processor and you're exposing those keys potentially.
And we haven't seen a flurry of proof of concepts and malware off the back of that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it works. There's some amazing POCs that show you what you can do with it. It's just a different model.
Yeah. I mean, I think sort of building on that and complexity, there's a great tool, I think Hal Flake did at SciCon. People sort of look into that this week, but he was talking about we're kind of introducing complexity where we don't need it. All these IoT devices are fully functional computers just because it's cheaper to do that. And it's easier to build complex devices now than it is to build non-complex devices. It's cheaper, it's more economic. But what you're doing is creating a massive kind of vulnerability in that space, that you have, a situation where the majority of computers in our homes will never be patched. Because often they can't. Now, we all instinctively go, I'm a really good cybersecurity person and I patch everything. You can't. And that, in terms of future sort of challenges, I think what VPN filters told us is that's quite a big challenge that I don't think we've got a solution to.
It's a rich space for attackers that's been under focused today. Now, granted, because you could email people with avert phishing of a giant dollar and they'll open it.
Okay, cool. What's your opinion on the situation? This is from Andy. Do we have Andy in the audience? What's your opinion on the situation Malware Tech Blog now finds himself in, since assisting the WannaCry issue? Now, are they really connected?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence, is the honest answer. It may be deeply plausible and he's in the wrong. I, from a personal perspective, don't think that's the case. But I just don't know. I'm just not involved in the proceedings. I do know that being involved in any legal battle, right or wrong, is a pretty horrifying experience, particularly in the US with a punitive legal system. So I sympathise, but I can't really help on the whether or not it's valid. I just don't have the data. But ouch. Ouch.
And I think, I can't sort of comment on the ongoing legal case, certainly in the US, but I think the one thing I would say though is that, he did a great service around WannaCry. He sort of helped the community. People that know him well know that he did sort of, do a huge amount in the community that was positive. So, I think, you should always sort of remember that. We're certainly not sort of forgetting that.
Yeah. Amen. That's cool. Good question from Anonymous here. Patching is hard. Is government pressuring the likes of Microsoft to improve the tools and processes, as industry can't be being blamed when it's nigh impossible? That's a great question.
Patching is hard.
It is.
And I'm glad someone said it, because we do fall into the habit of over-trivializing its deployment. There are cases where patching isn't hard and bad business risk decisions are made, like waiting 4 months on a severity one you knew about that's exploitable on a public-facing website. But operational failures happen, and achieving high rates of deployment is tough. I think the tools have got a lot better than they were. I think we're moving in the right direction. There seems to be a higher level of trust in rapid deployment of patches without extensive QA processes in many organizations, at least for small businesses. But I think it's right that we continue to nag and demand more. I guess I will admit that my focus has shifted a bit from them, who broadly have done quite a lot of good work in this area, to the litany of devices where you can't patch without standing on one leg, holding a chicken and rotating backwards, downloading a firmware bin file from some strange Chinese site you're supposed to know how to upload to a kettle you just bought. Like actual example minus the chicken, I think. So I agree, but I think operational undue focus is often the bigger problem for many organizations than others.
I'm going to ask a more direct question of you then, Paul. So
the
NIS directive.
I know, it's got that look.
Yeah.
The NIS directive, the one kind of obvious set of players that are excluded apparently from it is the manufacturers of software. So the NIS directive is all about holding people accountable for their impact on CNI. What do you think of that? Should that change?
So I think supply chain in all of those spaces actually, and I mean coming back to the sort of not Petcha, I mean that was a supply chain attack. It was going to the source of the software and then sort of it being downloaded. I don't think you can necessarily sort of use the same tools. I think again you've got to try and solve that in a different way. Ultimately, I think it's ensuring that the organisations that are covered by NIS, and it's not the whole of the CNI, it's certain sectors within the CNI, it's about maturing their processes around being aware of what they're buying and where they're buying it, and driving better behaviour in their supply chain. I think they've got to make that kind of conscious choice. I think a lot of the incidents we increasingly see as supply chain attacks, people are realising that to some degree we've had an effect. In the last 10 years I've certainly seen a real improvement in the cybersecurity of the UK, across many sectors. But the adversaries aren't giving up. So it's a really good sort of challenge. I don't think we're nowhere near having a perfect solution yet.
That's cool. Jack Davis. Jack, can you give us my eyesight?
GDPR is in effect
GDPR.
too.
Yeah, that's right. So private companies contact NCSE for instant response help.
So yes, so we work closely with law enforcement colleagues to sort of ensure that wherever you report into, either us or law enforcement, be it your local law enforcement community, that it is triaged and assessed in the same way. People won't be surprised that we will prioritise the amount of help and support we can give, depending on the incident and the severity of it. So we might sort of point people at our guidance. If they're struggling with an incident, we might point them at some of the accredited companies that we work closely with to help organisations, or we might deploy a team ourselves to go and deal with it, and it will really be sort of graduated. But it's certainly not just for government. As I said, we're here to help everybody in the UK, whoever they are. Hopefully a lot of people will have seen the work we've done for charities and small businesses this year, where there are examples where we've helped organisations out who have had problems.
Good. On the NCSE thing, what role did you play in responding to one of that?
So we sort of stood up our incident management processes that afternoon, and it sort of kicked off late on that Friday, like most of these things seem to, and really sort of led the operational response from across government. So coordinated all the different government departments. People may remember we had guidance up on our website for people within sort of a matter of sort of a small number of hours. Once we'd analysed it, once we'd worked out what was going on, we did a lot of media and sort of tried to some degree, we have a kind of public reassurance role increasingly now to say, look, this is what we understand this to be. Here are 3 basic things you should do. So I mean, we we talked about patching and backups because it was ransomware, and current antivirus is the 3 practical things we thought people could do. So we, and supported and sat in on the Cobra that I talked about. So supported the entire sort of. We we own that kind of national responsibility and accountability for managing incidents in the UK, and that was kind of the first time it was tested to the maximum.
And what lessons did you learn that you would do better next time?
So one of the things, there's one sort of key thing, and there isn't, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. One of the things that we were, I think, nervous about, certainly amongst the cybersecurity community, we didn't share our raw analysis as early as I think they would have wanted us to. And that was nervousness on our part, because we come from an organisation that if we write something, we want it to be right, and if we don't, and if we say something that's not right, we feel that we've got something wrong. And I think realising that actually, as long as you caveat your cons right, we could have told people a lot more. We could have caveated and said, this is our analysis, it might change in the next hour, because we were all learning so much as things changed. I think, certainly going forward, I think we'd be braver in sort of sharing our raw early analysis and recognising that it may not always be right, but people would rather have our initial thinking.
Yeah, that was good.
So yeah, certainly one thing I remember quite clearly and vividly, and the feedback we've had from a lot of the AV companies certainly.
Yeah. Before we carry on with those, any questions from the floor? The old-fashioned way of microphone and voice. Anyone want to ask a question? Oh, there's one down here. Do you want to put your hand back up to the lady with the mic?
Hello. I'd like to ask Paul, please, for his awareness and guidance, and James for his opinion and insight on the basis that an estimate of every product in the Olympia Hall today has flaws. Every year we talk about we need to do the basics first. Well, I've worked in this industry for many years. I know none of the technology works well enough.
I think the idea that any technology is going to be a silver bullet with 100% security is nonsensical. And you sometimes walk around and see marketing and go, yeah, that's just not true. I mean, it's an age-old cliche, but good security is a combination of people, process, and technology. I definitely think there are areas where technology needs to do better. I'm a huge proponent, as is Sophos more broadly, of some of the potential that can come out of machine learning and AI in driving better rules quicker to do better in technology terms. But even that, as an amazingly influential technology, I think doesn't eradicate the importance of proper and good security awareness processes, of processes that drive things like better patching, as we've kind of already talked about. Doing the basics is hard. I don't think it's that everyone here is just going, well, I can't be bothered to do them. It is a continuum of change. But making sure that you rationalize those 3 areas in balance, I think is a large part of doing what we're advocating. I've had too many incidents over the last year where someone bought shiny thing X, plugged it in and went, we're good, and then didn't have the processes for when they were breached. And let's be clear, you could buy every product here and it could still go wrong. You still need those processes, you still need the right training, people still need to be able to do their part. Regular phishing tests and proper security awareness isn't a boring policy. Doing the basics has a lot of implementation detail that makes a big difference, and if we do it all perfectly, we still won't be at 100%. But a lot of people are down at arbitrary percentage. 30 for some over-trust in certain parts of that or not a balanced distribution. It's really hard to give you a really detailed answer in the limited time, but hopefully that's some food for thought.
I mean, I think from my point of view, the real impassioned plea: invest in your people before you invest in the technology. Get the skills, because they will drive you using technology well. The number of times, the vast majority of people who I see using technology, cybersecurity products, are not using them to their maximum. They're not getting the best out of them in the first place, and that's because they haven't got the people with the right skills. We really have to, I think, focus on giving our workforce the right skills to use these things. it's not just about buying a product. I'm just echoing what James said. It is very much about processing and people, but for me, very sort of heavily on the people. We obviously sort of invest a lot in the skills of our people. One of the challenges I put out to industry on previous panels that I've done is really sort of what are you doing that's actively improving the sort of skill level in the UK? People will see all the the work that we do, but I think there's more that certainly large companies can do to increase that sort of skills pipeline. But get the people bit right, really, really important, and then sort of you'll get more out of the technology. It isn't perfect, but you can get a lot more out of it than I think a lot of people are at the moment.
Cool. We've got one person who wants to ask a question at the back there in the blue shirt, and then I'll go to one question there and ask you for one final
choose a
thoughts at the end.
The one he probably put on.
Yes, yeah. You're the Russian warehouse.
Yeah, well, that's the one I want to ask.
Oh, is it?
You built on my joke, so it's going to be a bit observant.
I apologise, it's probably a stupid question, but why do we still have to click on a link in an email to actually launch malware? Why doesn't the malware just launch itself when you open up an email or do something?
Not a stupid question in the slightest. Obviously, a desirable state for cyber criminals is you touch a thing or interact with it and boom, compromised. And we had years of that with web browsers where you just visit a web page and there was hundreds of thousands of typically SQL injection attack pages with code that just hit you on the spot. It's much harder to do that these days. It's much more expensive. I mean, if you look at Edge as a browser, I'm going to say nice things about Microsoft, so hold on to your seats, okay? It's got not only a bunch of OS mitigations, but things like isolated heap and VRE and vtable pointer guards, things that were specifically crafted to make the application harder to exploit even when they make mistakes. It's a tough ecosystem to find useful defects in email clients and browsers that do what you're describing. By the way, I'm looking around randomly because I have no idea where you are, person that asked the question. I totally missed you. Hello. Sorry. And so the result of that is lots of the exploits have gone up to values of hundreds of thousands. They're being sold on a more nation-state basis or for targeted attackers, generally. And the rest of the market, the common fraudsters, revert to asking people nicely. And the thing about asking people nicely is it's harder to detect and it works. So that's why there's so much of that. A little bit of fallout of economics, improvement in technical ecosystem, and it's just damn effective.
So I'm going to jump to just rephrase that question slightly. Should you buy things on the black market, or are you supporting the crooks? Because I think it's not just samples of malware for analysis, but it's also, you get a lot of cases of threat intelligence companies will say, we'll go to an organisation and say your customers' details are available on the black market. Would you like us to buy you some for you to check it? And that kind of thing. It's going to, should you buy stuff on the black market?
So, well, we don't. I mean, so again,
Yeah.
so I suppose it should. I mean, but again, it depends on who we're talking about now. I mean, I think
It depends.
it depends.
It depends.
Certainly, I mean, sort of a lot of the cybersecurity research community. There's a spectrum of kind of ethical sort of things that various organisations choose to do. Ultimately, they're doing it with the best intentions. I think very often what I find is that every corporate entity has their own kind of view, be it where they're headquartered, what their general counsel will say. I mean, it's quite a hard one for organisations. Yeah, it depends. I think. I mean, from a UK government, from our point of view, we don't generally sort of need to do that, but I can see a reason why people might.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's lots of it depends here, and if it's something you're considering going down the path of, I think legal counsel, careful policies, and ethical assessment is crucial. I think there are cases where it's right. I've been in situations where we've relatively low cost acquired data that has allowed us to raise awareness of the problem and contact all the impacted parties to thwart the damage that would be done to them. And I think that the net positive massively outweighed the negative. In many occasions we get access to their stuff around the sidelines without having to pay for these tools. And of course, in a world now where you've got advertising-based free access ransomware, in some cases money doesn't even need to change hands. So I think there can be cases where it's right, there can be cases where it's very wrong. You've got to venture here carefully under strict guidance of policy and legal counsel. And probably don't use your own Visa card. Just a thought.
Good.
Yours. Can I borrow yours?
So one line from each of you. What gives you cause for hope, optimism?
For me, it's the people coming through the pipeline. So I spend a lot of time, as I say, with apprentices, with the Cyber First events that we do, and looking at some of the amazing kind of talent and just, sort of the desire for sort of people to want to work in this business. I think the talent pipeline is the thing that gives me sort of real cause for optimism.
Cool.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that one, but seeing as you took it,
Good
I'm
place
going to
to
go for a
sit.
technology one. I mean, I know I've said it a few times, but don't fall into that trap of kind of machine learning and AI being a buzzword where you're like, there's not something real there. There's some really powerful concepts, really powerful technology that can have, I think, transformative impact to the security industry as a whole. Talking the scale of shift when people went from signatures that detected specific things to more generalized detection capabilities. That was a huge deal. I think this is the same shift again, and I think it applies to every product that you're going to see out there, the whole industry, at every part of the threat life cycle. And we must be cognizant that cyber criminals are going to see it as an opportunity area as well. So that bit scares me, but the potential of it, I'm pretty optimistic about how this is going to shape our industry in the coming years.
Great. James, Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.